Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, December 14th. Welcome to the Morning Medical Update. Thanks for joining us right here on Facebook and our YouTube channel. Since COVID-19 emerged, many types of animals have been infected, including pet cats and dogs, ferrets, zoo animals like big cats and primates, farm-raised mink, and of course, we've heard about white-tailed deer. According to the CDC, most of them got the virus from people. But now a new fear is that animals could unleash new viral variants. Some wonder if the Omicron variant began this way. We have brought back our fantastic animal experts from K-State. They will help us better understand the animal connection. So please make sure to get your questions sent in to us on YouTube, Facebook, and email those to the Medical News Network. You can find links right there on your screen. But first, let's check in with Dr. Hawkinson for a look at our numbers. Good morning. Any changes? What can you update us on?
Yeah, 39 active infections today with 12 in the ICU. And 8 of those are on the ventilator. We have 19 in that recovery period still, so 58 total patients. We did have an inpatient death yesterday, and of those 39 active infections, only 1 is fully vaccinated, so about 2.5%.
All right, Doc Hawk, thanks so much. Okay, before we get to our guest today, President Biden preparing to visit the hardest hit areas of Kentucky, where at least 74 people are now confirmed dead, while dozens more remain missing after a massive tornado hit this past weekend. The president will visit Mayfield and Dawson Springs. Those are the hardest hit areas where thousands of homes and businesses were either damaged or completely leveled and destroyed. This disaster could not come at a worse time as the number of Omicron cases grows across the U.S. And of course, hospitals in that area already seeing a surge. They now must make room for those folks who are injured. We are thinking of our Kentucky friends, as we know they are certainly suffering and struggling right now. Do we have any reporters on the line today? All right, we are going to get to our community questions, as always, here in just a few moments. The COVID cases, as we have been talking about, they're going up. Death rates are going up. We saw 4 deaths over the weekend here. It is a major concern. It is also affecting animals, and we have discussed this before, but we want to hit this topic again because the question has now been raised. Can animals spread and cause more variants? Several zoo animals like tigers and lions at the Bronx Zoo, they have gotten sick from the virus given to them by humans. Now it's being detected in a growing number of white-tailed deer. So that begs the question, do animals need to get the vaccine? A study from Penn State found that 80% of deer in Iowa had COVID-19 between December of 2020 and January of 2021. Researchers say this was the first direct evidence of COVID-19 in any free-living species, and the findings have implications for the ecology and the long-term persistence of COVID-19. So we want to bring in our guest today. Returning with us is Dr. Juergen Richt. He is director of the Center of Excellence for Emerging and Zoonotic Animal Diseases at K-State University, and Dr. Stephen Higgs is the associate vice president for research and director of the Biosecurity Research Institute at K-State University. We are so glad to have both of you with us today. You were with us before, and we had a huge audience response, a lot of questions for both of you. So buckle up. We're going to have more for you today. So Dr. Higgs, I want to find out, first of all, from you what you've been up to, what kind of research you've been doing. Tell us about BRI and what you're learning.
Oh, thank you, Jessica. It's a privilege to be invited back. As you mentioned, I'm the director of Kansas State University's Biosecurity Research Institute. What we do is we enable research, education, and training on multiple different diseases, including diseases of plants, foodborne diseases, and diseases of animals and of people, zoonotic diseases that infect humans and other species. Since 2020, we have very much shifted our focus to try and fill some of the gaps in the knowledge on SARS-CoV-2. And so this year alone, we've enabled 20 different research projects on many different species of animals. And the reason that this research is done is to provide basic understanding and knowledge, but also ultimately to save the lives of animals and of people. So a lot of the work that's being done at the BRI is concerned with diagnostics and vaccine development and testing. Of the 20 studies that we've done just this year, 10 of those have been on SARS-CoV-2. And of that 10, 9 of them have been conducted, financially supported and orchestrated by Dr. Richt, your other guest. So you're lucky you have not just a local expert, but somebody who is recognized nationally and truly internationally on this topic, and especially in terms of infections in non-human species vaccine development. So he's going to answer all of the difficult questions, Jessica.
Oh, fantastic. I like how you introduced. I couldn't have introduced him any better. So thank you for kind of co-hosting with me and just passing it on over to Dr. Richt. We're lucky to have both of you today. So thank you. So Dr. Richt, I'm just going to jump right in. What do you think this impact is with the Omicron variant and the virus? What do you think that is having right now on animals? Are you on mute?
Can you hear me?
I can. I
Can
got
you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
good. Thank you, Jessica, for having us again here from Kansas State. We are very happy to participate. So the first question is something I don't have a crystal ball, so I cannot predict what will happen. But what we can say is we have no evidence so far of an Omicron infected animal, period. No evidence. Will Omicron be able to infect susceptible animals, which were also able to be infected or susceptible to the Delta or other variants and the ancestral strain? Most likely. So I don't think what we know right now, the ecological scenario at this point will not change very much. But we have to wait. One important question we have not answered will be, are animals which were more or less resistant to infection with the Wuhan-like strain, the ancestral strain, or alpha, etc., beta, are these animals maybe susceptible to Omicron? And I'm talking about pigs, cattle, and ruminant species like sheep, etc. They were rather resistant to infection with the original strains. And with the significant changes Omicron brings with it in its spike protein, and we all know now the spike, which is on the surface of this virus, interacts with the receptor on the cell, and only if this interaction works very well, the virus gets access to the cell and can replicate. And since there are so many mutations in this spike protein, there might be a possibility that animals which were not susceptible to the ancestral strain might become susceptible. But these are studies we have to perform in next year, and this will be addressed by many researchers around the world.
So what do we know about the spread? I mean, we talk daily about the spread among humans, but what could we possibly know about the spread among animals in close proximity to each other? And what is the effect of that?
So are you asking in general or about Omicron?
Well, maybe both.
Okay, in general, we know they are highly susceptible animals like cats, like white-tailed deer, and they very easily spread the virus within their population. So if one deer gets infected, this animal will infect other deer which are in close proximity to that deer. And the same will be true for cats and other highly susceptible animals. That's what we know. And it might be the same if an animal is susceptible to Omicron. So if one gets infected and there's a whole herd or a whole kitten, there are several kittens in a cattery, the whole cattery might get infected. So with these highly susceptible animal species.
So, Doc, do you think that that animals are playing a bigger part than we know in the battle of COVID and the spread and certainly creating new variants?
So Jessica, I might have discussed that last time I was on here. Dr. McNamara and myself and Larry Glickman, we published a paper in May last year, 2020, in the journal, which is edited by our co-guest here, by Dr. Higgs from Kansas State. And already in May 2020, we warned that if we don't do a lot of biosurveillance, if we don't spend money to do biosurveillance in susceptible animal species, and not only in domestic species, but also in wildlife, we might get surprises that this virus might find a niche, a secondary reservoir in an animal species. And this is what we warned about already 1.5 years ago. And when we see the data now, we from various labs, including our lab, what happens in white-tailed deer, it seems to be that this virus very easily transmits from humans into white-tailed deer, and then it spreads within the white-tailed deer population in a certain area. And this is more or less evidence that there might be a secondary reservoir established in a wild animal
Dr.
species.
Higgs. Dr. Higgs, let's bring you back in on this, because I know in your spare time you write for a journal and you were recently published. So tell us a little bit about that. Hold it up for us so we can see it. You got the proof. You got the proof right there. So tell us a little bit about that and what information was published.
All right. So yeah, in my spare time, Jessica, I'm editor of this vector-borne and zoonotic diseases journal, international journal. And as Juergen mentioned, last year we published a piece co-authored by him that was really raising awareness for the first time of what might this virus be doing in different animal species. And I'll have to tell Juergen, you probably don't know this, but that's been, I think, the most cited manuscript over the last few years in the journal. On Friday, Jessica, and I did not author this paper, there was a manuscript published on white-tailed deer in Texas. And so here in Kansas, it's deer hunting season. I think that started December 1st. I've got a friend who went deer hunting, didn't see a deer. He's blaming chronic wasting disease. But obviously this is hunting season, and hunters are inevitably potentially exposed to the virus in the deer. The Texas study showed that 37% of the deer that they sampled were positive by antibody testing. So it had been exposed at some point and produced antibodies. They did a sort of a negative control study. So they also looked at samples from 40 deer that were collected by hunters in 2018. And, that's before SARS-CoV came on the scene. And none of those deer were positive, as you would expect. But the ones collected in 2021, so this year in Texas, 37% were positive. About 82% of those positives were relatively young, about 1.5 years old, sort of tender deer for the hunters to harvest. And there was also a significant difference between males and females. Of the positives, 50% were male and 21% were female. I don't think anybody really knows how these deer are becoming infected and what the potential consequences are of those wild animals circulating more and more in urban environments. I mean, that's something that we are concerned about. I've got deer, my friend couldn't find deer in the wild. I've got them in my yard every day. So those animals are increasing in numbers, becoming more urbanized, if you like. Mm-hmm. And so that brings the potential for close contact with people.
Okay, so that was my next question. Not a lot of people are coming within 6 feet of white-tailed deer. And that's no joke, but I was just thinking about that. I mean, when you're hunting, I mean, they're dead. And then you say that you can't, they're not able to get infected by the meat. Is that correct? So how would it be spreading?
So Dr. Richt has actually done experiments in the BRI that demonstrated that susceptibility of white-tailed deer. So, Juergen, tell us about white-tailed deer infections. Which tissues is it in?
First of all, the first question is, how do these deer get infected? It looks like that these are individual introductions from humans which were infected in the area, because the isolates they find in deer correspond to human isolates at the same time circulating in the human population. So it's not one deer-adapted virus which is circulating in the deer population. Does that make sense? So it's individual introductions from humans into deer population in specific regions of the country. And you mentioned Iowa, others did studies in Ohio, etc. So that's number one. So how does that happen? People, deer, I worked with deer for 20 plus years, white-tailed deer, they're very flighty animals. And as you know, if you get close to deer, they rather run away than come to you and want to be petted. So there are various scenarios we can discuss. The higher incidence of deer infection in the wild is in urban, suburban areas compared to more rural areas. So that's number one. So contact with humans. How does that contact happen? People eat an apple, throw it into their yard, the deer eats it. Hunters are baiting deer. In some states that's still allowed, in others it's forbidden, so maybe the feed is contaminated. People play in the backyard, kids play in the backyard, and they leave their toys or whatever in there, or other human objects which we leave there. And they might be, contact the grass these deer eat. We know that RNA is found in wastewater. So is there enough RNA to have infectious virus? I don't know, but there could be incidences that could happen, or human waste, etc., in the environment. So these are the scenarios we are discussing, but there is no clear data how this really happened. We only discuss scenarios, and we need to get research underway to study these different hypotheses to figure out how this happens.
Okay, this is why we bring you super smart doctors on here, because I'm here to ask the layman questions and you make me understand it. So thank you, and that makes a lot of sense. We are already getting lots of questions. We're going to get to those in just one moment, just a couple more. Let's talk about zoo animals. Are they getting vaccinated? What benefit will this create?
I think I addressed this. So we are doing work in various animal species with COVID-19, and we have established a model in pet animals. And the company which is producing and distributing a vaccine to zoos, not only in the US, throughout the world, and to mink farms in the US, they came to us and asked us to test their vaccine. So there is a vaccine produced in the United States by the company Zoonotic, and this vaccine is used to vaccinate mink. USDA, which regulates vaccination in animals, USDA CVP, does not allow this vaccine to be used in cats or dogs or other pet animals officially. They allow it in mink. That's the only permission you get right now in the United States to produce vaccines for animals. The exception is Zoetis is providing this vaccine to zoos in the United States to protect endangered animals, zoo animals. And we are talking large cats, we are talking primates, gorillas, chimpanzees, etc. And you might not know that, but just in the last couple weeks, we have new animals in zoos which came down with disease, some of them, and several of and with infection. And these are hyenas. These are hippopotamus, so hippos, lynx, fishing cats, and binturongs. So the list of susceptible animal species in zoos which get infected by their caretakers getting longer and longer and longer. So this virus is really very promiscuous and can infect a lot of animal species. And Zoetis has a vaccine developed for animals, and this vaccine is distributed throughout zoos in the United States. And I understand, talking to them recently, also throughout the world, to protect endangered species. And Kansas State and my group and the BRI has contributed in doing efficacy studies to show the efficiency and efficacy of this vaccine to protect the mink population in the United States and endangered species around the world.
I am going to let our community jump in because they've got some great questions coming. Let's just get to it. And Jean has a question. What about ticks infecting deer or other animals?
So we did the very first studies to be published on the susceptibility of mosquitoes to this virus. And we're delighted to find that the virus could not infect and be transmitted by mosquitoes. Ticks are obviously very different from mosquitoes, but this group of viruses, these coronaviruses, have never been associated with arthropods and transmission by arthropods. So obviously, as a tick feeds on a deer, if that deer has virus in its blood, that virus may go into the feeding tick, but there are no data, and I think it's highly unlikely that the virus would actually multiply in that tick and subsequently be transmitted by it. That's my personal opinion based on some of our experiments and knowledge of this group of viruses.
I know, Dr. Higgs,
maybe I can add something to
yes,
this,
please do.
Jessica.
Please do.
We have done also studies in midges, which are also biting insects, and they don't replicate the virus. But so they are not biological vectors. But we ask another question. Can houseflies mechanistically transmit the virus? So there is a virus contaminated, whatever, somebody sneezes somewhere and the housefly sits on it and then it flies to the next spot. Can that mechanically, a housefly, transfer infectious virus from spot A to spot B? And the answer is yes. Up to 24 hours after contamination, a housefly, an individual housefly, we tested individual houseflies, can be still infectious, and even longer they carry RNA. So the mechanistic parts of insects we have to take into consideration in some cases.
All right, I'm going to bring Dr. Hawkinson in for a couple of COVID questions. You know I'm not going to leave you out. Okay, so Lindsay wants to know, if I have had both Pfizer vaccines, last one was April 30th and had COVID at the beginning of November this year, is there a way to test to see if antibodies are still high before I decide to get the booster, or should she just get the booster?
I think just get the booster. You know, we're seeing more evidence, and there's a fairly good recent paper in Science Translational Medicine, which also does show that those that were infected and then got at least one dose of the vaccine continue to have maybe a wider breadth or a higher amount of overall antibodies, but also likely those T cells, which are so important. So I think if you were vaccinated and then got infected in November, I think it's probably a good time right now to go ahead and get that that next dose, that booster dose. We are learning more that booster doses are effective at further providing protection against hospitalization and severe disease, but also possibly just getting infected at all, even from Omicron. So I think it is very important if you have been infected in November, it's a good time to go get your booster. And also a little bit on the point of the virus and what we call viremia, when the virus is spreading through your blood. For SARS-CoV-2, that does seem to be very short-lived, very transient, and not significant, not like something with, say, HIV or hepatitis B. So the chance that there is a feeding mosquito or tick that would be feeding on you at that time is likely very, very small. So.
You know, I ask this question a lot, though. What is with booster hesitancy? If you've already gotten the 2 shots, are people concerned that they're going to be over-vaccinated or it's just not necessary? Why not just get the booster?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a variety of reasons there. You know, certainly maybe they had an adverse event or felt fairly bad after that second dose and don't really want to get the third dose. But we are seeing more evidence now that is supportive of those third doses, especially if we're talking about in the surge of Delta, which we are currently in. Again, there is a very, very small, relatively small number of Omicron cases that we know about in the United States, so we are still dealing with a Delta surge. But those booster doses will help protect you moving forward.
Joe Allen has a question for our guests. Would you both please discuss the effect of transmission of COVID from humans to their companion cat or dog? What to watch for? Do you need to stay socially distant and isolated from the family pet?
Exactly. The same rules which apply to a human-to-human transmission apply to a human-to-animal transmission. And that's the basic. If your dog or cat sleeps with you in the bed and you are COVID-19, you're SARS-CoV-2 positive, you don't want to have that. And you want to isolate yourself also from your spouse or your family if you're infected. So you do the same with susceptible animals. And that not only includes a dog, a cat, it includes ferrets, it includes hamsters and mice, etc. So you have to be aware that animal species, they're mammalians, and they are also many of them susceptible to this virus.
So then Janet has a follow-up. What symptoms do we look for in our dogs and cats? Do we know that? And if you think they may have COVID, is there anything you can do about it?
So we have done studies in some of these animals, and we do not see very clear clinical symptoms. But in the field, in the practices, very often cats and dogs with respiratory signs, if you go to the clinic and they come from a household with COVID-19 patients and your cat or dog has respiratory signs, that's very often a clinical sign for COVID-19 in these animals. And most animals we used are rather young and without comorbidities, in other words, other diseases. And very often these animals, like cats, mainly cats and dogs, have comorbidities like diabetes. We have a lot of obese cats with diabetes and other underlying diseases. And they are the ones which come to the clinic with respiratory symptoms. Very similar what we see in humans. If you are not vaccinated and you have comorbidities like diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity, etc., you are more susceptible to a more severe course of the disease. And the same is true for these animals, for our pets.
So Janet wants to know, should she send her dog or cat to a daycare, a doggy daycare or a pet daycare in the Kansas City area? And I guess my follow-up would be, should people go to that extreme, especially if they're immunocompromised and they're trying to protect themselves, just like you wouldn't maybe send your kid out without a mask to school? Should you not send your pet somewhere to bring something home to you?
So we have to realize we have hundreds of millions of human cases of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 infection. But we have maybe a couple hundred in animals. So there is a huge difference. They're not outbreaks everywhere. It's here and there, an individual animal. The only difference right now is the white-tailed deer. That's the only difference. So a cat and dog infections are rather rare. And so the chance that you bringing your animal to a kennel, to a cattery or kennel, that they get kennel cough or other diseases is much higher, in my opinion, than COVID-19. So keep your animals vaccinated against these diseases, which are common among the cat and dog population. And I think that the chance to get one of these general diseases, which are circulating in cats and dogs, is much higher than COVID-19.
Yeah, good point. Keep them safe from other viruses that are out there for sure. Okay, Dr. Higgs, I can't have you on the show without talking about what's behind you. You're the mosquito expert. So I know you mentioned mosquitoes a little bit before, but I do have to ask you, there they are, right there over your right shoulder. But tell me about any findings with mosquitoes. I think that's always a question about what can we find out about them? What do we need to know? And what are you learning that's new?
So thank you, Jessica. I've been working on mosquitoes and the viruses that they transmit for 30-something years, since like 1985. What you see in the background is a large plastic mosquito, actually made in Germany. It all pulls apart. It's a great teaching aid. I sort of jokingly say to people that this is a Texas-sized mosquito. It's about 2 feet long.
For sure.
So people have known about viruses transmitted by mosquitoes since the late 1800s, early 1900s. So over 120 years ago. We still don't have the answers to some of the most basic questions as why some viruses can infect mosquitoes and not others, why certain species of mosquitoes are susceptible to one virus and not another. And that's the type of stuff we've been working on for many years. And also research on vaccine viruses in mosquitoes. There was a concern that if a live attenuated vaccine virus got into mosquitoes, could it actually mutate and become dangerous again? We've done those sorts of studies, and I've never seen any evidence of that sort of reversion to virulence in mosquitoes. In fact, one of the curious things is that for whatever reason, these viruses are not only attenuated in their infections for humans, but they're also attenuated for mosquitoes and don't infect mosquitoes either. We've got no idea why that is. And some of the types of research that we do is because of that concern that it might mutate in a mosquito, maybe you could rationally design vaccines that have specific mutations that prevent their infectivity for mosquitoes. Problem is we don't know what those are.
We don't have all the answers.
And the rest of the background is a sample of my microscope collection going back to the 1800s. There's some beautiful instruments in the background which are optically absolutely superb.
I call you the mosquito guy, but you are a much accomplished doctor. I know that, but you're always so fun to talk to about those kind of things. And yes, we do not have all the answers, but that's why we have you, Dr. Higgs. A couple more questions, and we're going to get to some final thoughts. But question from Deb, Dr. Richt, would we need to isolate from pets like birds? You said with cats and dogs, same goes for birds?
The evidence we have was infection of birds with the Wuhan-like strains, and they are resistant to SARS-CoV-2 inoculation, various inoculation routes. So birds are not on our list of susceptible animals.
Okay, Angela has a question, and I think we talked about this last time you were both on. Is there a vaccine for pets? If not, when will that be, possibly? And if so, would vets administer those to the animals at some point? Do we think that's going to be necessary?
As I mentioned before when we talked about vaccines, USDA CVB doesn't allow pets, dogs and cats and ferrets, etc., being vaccinated against SARS-CoV-2. The only exception is mink, because we have outbreaks in mink farms in the United States and actually Canada and all over the world. So there is a vaccine was developed for pets by at least one company, as far as I know, so it is. But this vaccine is not approved for usage in pet animals. It is approved for usage in mink farms and in endangered zoo animals.
So Angela wants to know, and Dr. Hawkinson, you can jump in on this as well, but how long do viruses live on objects outside? Is that really an issue? I know, Dr. Richt, you had mentioned that that's one way that deer are walking around, or maybe eating discarded food or walking on grass that might be infected. But Dr. Hawkinson, what do we know about how long the virus might live outside?
Yeah, I mean, so this virus is probably a little bit more hardy than something like HIV, which lives very, very short time if it's outside of the fluid, the blood, and if it's in dried blood, it'll die pretty quickly. We know a virus like hepatitis B can sometimes live on surfaces for up to 7 days or so. This virus, I think, as with other respiratory viruses, a lot in the environment is going to be determined by the humidity levels, obviously the amount of virus or in that respiratory droplet. What we have seen, certainly from humans, is that fomite transmission, so inanimate object transmission, is very low to minimal. So, and especially if you are out, maybe in the environment, say not in a room, but outside, the virus is probably not going to remain infectious for too long. Again, you will if you're on a surface that's showing to the sun, you're going to have that UV radiation. The humidity levels, it will dry out, things like that. So I think it probably doesn't live too long. I think initial studies worked on several hours to a couple days and depending on which objects they are adhering to, and again, are you indoors or outdoors? So, but certainly for humans, we have not found that there's a significant amount of transmission of this virus to other humans. More risky is those indoor at-risk places where you are gathered close together.
That makes sense, though. A lot of
Jessica, we have done
Jessica?
6 studies on this.
Okay.
One and published studies. They're peer-reviewed. Sorry, Steve, you wanted to say something?
I was actually going to introduce her. I was just going to say to Jessica that, one of the industries that was especially affected by SARS-CoV-2 was the meat packaging industry. And we've got a project run by Randy Phoebus and Sally Davis here, who are looking at transmission in a simulated meat processing plant. That includes studies of virus on surfaces. But as Dr. Richt is about to say, he did a phenomenal study looking at survival of virus on plastic and stainless steel and all sorts of things. So Juergen, you were going to tell us about that.
Yes, we did actually 2 studies, a recent one. We did one on surfaces and one on biological fluids like nasal fluid, saliva, urine, etc. And the bottom line is, it depends whether it's summer, fall, or winter. The virus hates summer because there's UV light and all this, and the temperature doesn't like it. So only a day or so, depends on the surface. But the virus loves winter. And in many of our surfaces, plastic, metal, wood, whatever, the virus survives 21 days, 3 weeks. So a long time, and we did not contaminate with, incredible amount of virus, only in a 10 to the 4, 10,000 virus particles. It survives for a long time, and these survival in the environment in winter and in fall, less in fall and spring, can contribute to these fomite-based transmissions, which don't play a big role, but they play a role in some settings.
Question from Angela. Do we need to? Yes. Do you have something to add, Dr. Higgs?
I was just going to say, Jessica, once again, it shows don't eat yellow snow, right?
Yeah. Now that's advice I can get behind. See, you're always keeping it real for me, and I appreciate it. Okay. So something I hate about summer are the flies. They kind of look like the size of what's behind you, Dr. Higgs. But Angela wants to know, do we need to worry about flies transmitting, landing in our houses, all over our surfaces? Any concerns there that any of you could add?
So Juergen has done studies with USDA collaborators that show that mechanically flies, if you dip them in the virus, they can still be infectious potentially over hours. But I think in the grand scheme of things that there are no data to implicate flies even mechanically transmitting the virus, and it would be highly unlikely, not impossible, but highly unlikely that that's a source of infection, in my opinion.
All right, Dr. Hawkinson, I'm going to ask you, I think I'm going to just ask you a couple quick questions. Elena says, we keep seeing that you need 3 shots to be adequately protected against Omicron. What about my 5-year-old? We're so excited to get her vaccinated, but now she won't be fully protected, it seems like. So what do you do to protect that age group? Do you feel like if a 5-year-old is shot twice, that they're pretty well protected?
I think you have pretty good protection. Again, remember, a lot of these studies are looking at post 2-dose vaccine. So you're looking at, for most of these people in these studies, you're looking at 6 months or more. And so I think that's a lot of it. They're also talking about, you have to also understand in these studies, are they talking about effectiveness against infection, or is it effectiveness against severe disease? And, 2 doses still does offer good protection against severe disease and hospitalization. For the 3rd dose, obviously that is going to hopefully provide you further evolution of your antibody responses to help provide you even protection against even infection. So right now, the 5-year-olds haven't been authorized to get the vaccine for very long. So they should still be protected, and certainly better protected than with no vaccine at all.
All right. I think Jerry is trying to help me answer this question that you and I, Doc Hawk, were talking about. But he's saying some of the fully vaccinated may be waiting for the booster vaccines so that they can tweak it for the mutation. Is that happening? Should people wait?
So I think they are working on it right now, but I think we ultimately will have to see if it is truly needed. If that pivot is needed, we know the vaccine companies are experimenting, but the earliest data would suggest that even getting that 3rd dose of the mRNA-based vaccines that are available now is going to provide you further protection against infection, but also, and of course, hospitalization, severe disease, and death. So I would not wait for any pivoted doses right now. I haven't heard any timeline of when those would be released. If they are released, go ahead and get what's available.
All right. Last question is from Maggie. She wants to know, is it safe to eat deer meat? What should we know about that?
Should I address it? Okay, we have done experimental studies in white-tailed deer, and we looked at the different compartments where this virus could be present in deer. And one important compartment is obviously the blood. If the virus is in the blood, it will be distributed equally throughout the body and into the muscle tissues. But this virus, we could never find any evidence in the blood of deer of the presence of SARS-CoV-2. So for this reason, the virus is not in muscles. There could be a cross-contamination that if deer are dressed in the field and people take out, say, the plaque, meaning the respiratory tract, and then cross-contaminate it with meat, there could be a contamination. But if you cook it, it's done. So for me, and maybe that's some last thing I want to say to the hunters which are on here, CDC, OIE, and other organizations, they recommend to use a mask if you field dress your animals, your deer, in order to avoid, when you take out the plaque and you got the deer, that you don't get contaminated if the deer might be infected. I would go further and would say, there are ways to dress a deer, and it's called gutless dressing, that you do gutless dressing and don't open the thoracic and peritoneal cavity, and just dress the deer, take the forelimbs and the tenderloins and the neck, and without opening the cavities, and then you are safe.
Okay.
Gutless dressing is my recommendation for hunters.
Okay, great advice. We have a lot of deer hunters in these parts, so thank you for that. I want to get to our final thoughts. I don't like those because that means you two are going away, and we really love having you both on. It's always such a pleasure, and you have to promise to come back. But Dr. Juergen Richt, I am going to start with you. Just your final thoughts for us today.
My final thoughts is, and we all heard about it, vaccination is important, not only for humans, but also for animals. If you take your animals against COVID and other diseases, influenza is coming back. So get vaccinated not only against COVID, but also against other communicable diseases like flu, etc. And the same is true for your pet animals. If you bring your pet animals in a crowded kennel, you will be exposed to various diseases, and get your pets vaccinated. Go to the vet and get the vaccination schedule up to date. And also, I think I'm a veterinarian, and we and the animals are part of our ecosystem. And as I said in one of my early discussions, we already published a paper 1.5 years ago to discuss and warn about doing more biosurveillance in animals, and not so we know better what's happening with this virus. We need to think about animals and spend money to do these studies. This costs money. This is not cheap. And that's what I want to say to our stakeholders, politicians, decision makers, that they don't forget animal health and animals as part of the ecosystem of these zoonotic diseases. And one of the important examples right now is SARS-CoV-2. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Dr. Richt, thank you so much for your insight today. Dr. Higgs, your final thoughts.
Thank you, Jessica. No real words of wisdom here. A typical English motto is don't panic. Everybody should stay informed. They should use sources of information that are credible, I would say. Act responsibly and have a wonderful Christmas with your families.
That is a great voice of reason. Thank you so much to both of you, friends. We appreciate it very much. And we will see you soon. And yes, have a wonderful and safe holiday. Dr. Hawkinson, final thoughts today.
Yeah, great information and messages from our guests. I would just echo that and get vaccinated, get your pets vaccinated, get your children vaccinated. Keep your bubble and your friends and loved ones safe. We know vaccination works, and so there's still time to go and do that.
All right, Dr. Hawkinson, thanks. Can't say it enough. All right, my final thoughts. I shall use my mini-me to explain. Here's the latest edition of Sunny Says. And Sunny has a message for kids that it is safe to vaccinate.
Hi friends, it's Sunny, and Sunny says it's safe to vaccinate. But don't take it from me, I'm just a kid. Take it from these super smart docs.
Hey Sunny, what's up?
Like Dr. Angela Myers at Children's Mercy Hospital. She really knows her stuff.
Sunny, there are so many doctors and scientists that have been working so hard to make sure this vaccine is safe and effective. We have already vaccinated over 1 million kids.
I was brave. I got my shot. Sunny says it doesn't really hurt, just a quick pinch, and then you're on your way. By the way, it's okay if you and your parents have lots of questions, but Sunny says make sure you go to the right places for answers, and make sure you're asking the right people, like your pediatrician. My parents talked to mine. Hi, Dr. Lauer.
Hi, Sunny. I told your parents that the risks from COVID were much scarier than any risk from the vaccine. You'll be safer after you get it. Hey, Sunny, are your friends following your lead?
You bet they are, like my friend Tommy Ralph.
Hey, Sonny, I got my shot. Look at my guns.
Tommy Ralph and Antonio did it for their grandparents. They died after battling COVID. They really missed them and want to make them proud.
Be strong like me and get the shot.
And be strong and brave like Isabella.
Hey, Sonny, check out my vaccination card. Oh, yeah, baby.
And her brother.
I did it, and so can you.
Remember, Sunny says your parents want the best for you.
Tell all your friends to listen to mom and dad and their doctors, not just anyone on the internet.
Your parents might want you to wait to get your shot, but Sunny says keep wearing your mask so you can stay safe and healthy. Let's get vaccinated so we can all get back to normal. Well, the new normal, but we're cool with that. Remember, Sunny says it's safe to vaccinate.
And we cannot remind you enough that blood supplies are alarmingly low here in the metro. Simply put, we need blood. The Community Blood Center's blood supply stands at a 1 to 2 day inventory, and that is well below the ideal 7-day supply. There are 2 ways that you can set up an appointment if you are eligible to donate, and most people are. There is information on your screen. You can call that or savealifenow.org. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thanks to our panel of guests. And don't forget, you can catch this show anytime on Facebook and on YouTube. Coming up tomorrow, it is Open Mics with Dr. Stites. He is back. So this is called essential tremors. Many people suffer from it, and it keeps them from the simplest of tasks and really just a good quality of life. But now advanced technology targets the part of the brain responsible for these type of tremors. We're going to show you just how it is improving lives. And guess what? The best part? No surgery is needed. We're going to tell you all about it, and you'll meet some guests tomorrow as well. So we'll see you at 8. Have a great Tuesday.
Subscribe to our morning medical update and Open Mics with Dr. Stites podcasts. Now everywhere podcasts are available.